Richard Feynman said, "Never confuse education with intelligence. You can have a PhD and still be an idiot." What are some real-life examples of this? Text. My ex-boyfriend's mother was a linguistics professor and knew over 10 languages. She was also one of the dumbest people I've ever met. Some examples. She believed that in case of emergency stewardesses catapult out of the plane. She was also convinced donating blood causes some blood disease and you can die because of it. But my favorite one was when she said her son's orthopedic problems are not a result of a serious injury he had. His knee hurts because he eats too much ketchup. I had a boss who was an engineer who put a couple $100 in change in a bank's pneumatic drive-through tube where it got stuck and they had to use a jackhammer to get it out. He was upset that the bank was charging him for this because he didn't know this would happen. They had large signs saying not to put change in the tubes, including on the tubes themselves. He just filled the thing with random change, not in rolls or anything. Like he thought it was a fucking Coinstar. That's hilarious, unless you were in line behind him. My first call at my first IT job was in a medical laboratory. There was a doctor who had been in the job for years and she called saying her computer would not power on. I walked her through some troubleshooting and nothing worked. Is the computer plugged in? Okay. Is the monitor on? Okay. When did the problem start? Type of questions were asked and she answered them all. I go up to her office and indeed the computer is plugged into a power strip which is plugged into itself. Cleaning crew had deep cleaned her office and never plugged anything back in. Doctor plugged the power strip into itself thinking that as long as it was plugged in, that's all she needed. Part of me wonders if she caught the cords mixed up, like she thought what she was plugging in was something other than the power strip. Depending on the length of the cords, I could see it getting lost in the tangle and just plugging it in. The cord was only about 6 feet long and you could easily see the whole thing. I unplugged it from itself and plugged it into the wall. Easiest fix ever. It was first thing in the morning at about 7 a.m. so maybe she wasn't fully awake. I have a PhD, and I work with a bunch of PhDs. Basically, a lot of them think that because they succeeded in one area, they are an expert in every other area of life. And they always have strong opinions about everything. I think it's also called a PhD syndrome. One of the main benefits from my education was to teach me how much I don't know. It's baffling to me that people get confidence to speak on things they don't know anything about just because they're educated. I went to 3 years when I felt something was wrong with my arm. It felt like a bug bite day 1 and by day 4 a bungee cord from my elbow to my wrist. 3 doctors said it was a skin irritation or dermatitis. I kept telling them something was wrong. I have no medical degree. I work in property management. Day 5 I walked into another and said, I don't care if I have to pay out of pocket or sit here all night but something is wrong with my arm. Finally, after many rude looks and comments I was given an ultrasound of my arm. Then rushed to a MRI. Then told I was being admitted. A 3 inches blood clot in my upper arm, 2 in my chest area, and 1 had passed my lung already. Diagnosed with factor 2 gene mutation 22 days later, blood clotting disorder. My wife's stepfather was a chemist who currently has diabetes. One night he went to the ER because his blood sugar was dangerously high. He claimed he was eating well, he normally doesn't, so there's no reason why his blood sugar was high. In his car was a 2-liter bottle of ginger ale mixed in with grape juice. He said that the 2 canceled their sugars out and we didn't know what we were talking about because he was a chemist and he knows how to combine things. It is, with respect to sugar, unless you're doing a low sugar juice you've got the same numbers as soda, because he doesn't drink diet, but when I was hearing this I'm just trying to imagine the taste. This happened earlier this year and he still argues he's right. Like dude, you add a vodka kicker to a margarita, does it suddenly cancel out the alcohol? Or is a Long Island iced tea no longer potent because you've canceled everything else out? I'm no scientist but I've added my sodas together when I was younger and I never had suddenly regular tasting water. It's been shown to me by many Redditors that I am incorrect in that I held on to a disproven opinion that the diet soda sweetener had an increased link to cancer. I admit I am wrong, though it never stopped me from drinking Diet Dr. Pepper. Like he might be a chemist, but that doesn't mean he knows anything useful about diabetic biochemistry. You see this with engineers a lot too. Engineers will be like, I know X because I'm an engineer. No, you're a mechanical engineer who works in design and finite element analysis. You do not have the same level of clarity on nuclear reactor maintenance. And here I am, having not gone to college for chemistry or any field of science I'm interested in, because I believe I'm not intelligent enough to be any kind of scientist. While I feel like I'm not intelligent, I also kinda wish I was dumber so I could just blindly go into things that other people do and seem to end up just fine. Lol. I actually read an article long time ago that stated dumb people are more successful than intelligent people for this very reason. An intelligent person can envision the difficulties of pursuing something and, as a result, go, fuck that. A dumb person can't, won't, and will just plummet head first into something hoping for the best. I didn't know that Steve Jobs was a chemist. But for real, Steve Jobs, by all regarded as one of the most brilliant marketers of all time, and when he was diagnosed with a more treatable form of pancreatic cancer, he said, "Fuck modern medicine, my organ that regulated blood sugar level. I'll just eat nothing but sugar, fruit, and that'll cure my struggling organ." Like someone with liver disease giving up water and committing only to drink beer. His stupidity in one area lead to his death despite his brilliance in other areas. I'm literally laying in the ICU at the moment with a fresh kidney transplant, and anybody who does this shit should be banned by UNOS. I'm so incredibly grateful to the woman who died for my gift of life, and I can't wait to express my gratitude to her surviving family. My friend's daughter was an organ and tissue donor. The notes my friend received from the people that's lives were changed by her daughter are really what kept my friend alive some days. Those notes mean the absolute world to the families of the donors. I was at a keg party at college and the gravity keg was set up. Someone complained that the beer was not flowing, so I checked that the keg was still almost full. Turns out someone closed the air intake on top. I opened the intake and poured myself a beer. Problem solved. A few minutes later someone else complains the beer is out. I told them the keg was full a few minutes ago and it was a tap problem that I fixed. They told me they just came from the keg. I go back to the keg and find the intake was closed again. Opened it and poured the young lady who said it was empty a beer. As she is leaving, my suitemate comes in and goes to the intake and closes it. Now my suitemate is a student who gets all is mostly due to his photographic memory. Back to the keg. So I tell him that he needs to leave the intake open to let air in to displace the beer coming out of the lower tap. He then proceeds to tell me that since the beer is carbonated, air is not needed to replace the liquid volume lost when the beer is dispensed. So I asked him two questions. If it is not needed, why is there the upper tap, and does he really think the amount of gas the carbonation gives off in a glass of beer is equal to the volume of the liquid beer? He thought for a few seconds and his only response was, "I have a 4.0, what is your GPA?" Then he walked away. My petty ass would make a huge announcement to everyone at the party to pay attention and show how the keg works and call out the sweet mate. Like totally saying, "Hey guys, sweet mate seems to know how this keg works since he has a 4.0 GPA. So if the beer doesn't come out, have them show you." Peter Duesberg, molecular biologist who works as a researcher at UC Berkeley and has an otherwise stellar career and well known for his work, became an AIDS denialist, claiming there's no link between HIV and AIDS. Led countless people down the rabbit hole, including many who were HIV positive. These individuals ended up infecting others and refusing antiretroviral therapies. This included an AIDS denialist activist named Christine Majore who infected her infant through breastfeeding, thinking, "Hey, it's not a big deal, it's just HIV, it doesn't cause AIDS." Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize for inventing PCR, also questioned the link between HIV and AIDS. I chatted with him on a plane once and he was indeed pretty dumb. Edit. Dumb in many ways, but clearly unique and smart in others. I'm not here to bash Kary Mullis because PCR is cool as hell and he seemed cool in some ways too. Met him once after a lecture at the university I was working at. It was amazing to me how he stuck to his mantra of, just a surfer dude researcher who single-handedly conceived of PCR, and conveniently left out the dozens of other scientists and technicians who helped with the preceding work and subsequent refinement of the process. Yeah, it was funny because when I met him I was seated with him and another scientist, on a plane to Boston, of course. I was telling them both about some stuff I did with a fancy, at the time, version of PCR, and he just listened and then talked about surfing, mostly, and I was thinking, who is this bozo? When I got off the plane, the other scientist was like, it's not every day you meet a Nobel laureate, and I was like, what? Who was that? And that's when he told me who it was. He had gotten Mullis' card and gave it to me, and I still have it somewhere. I worked IT for a hospital. I was speaking to a doctor who forgot his password. While he was spelling his name phonetically over the phone, he said, Z is in xylophone. Needless to say, my eyebrows raised. I worked with a girl that graduated from Brown. She would never shut up about it. Always Brown this and Brown that. I went to a state school, and it was apparent that she looked down on anyone that didn't attend an Ivy League school, so one day she was doing that and I couldn't stop myself. I said something like, oh, you went to Brown. And yet, here we are, together in the same place, doing the same job. I had someone on my ship who wouldn't shut up about being older and college educated. She was 3 ranks below me. She had no grasp on the concept of experience. Yeah, I have a degree, but if someone has more experience, I will always listen to that for sure. Maybe it's because I have a blue-collar background. I know some that just won't listen. It never works out well for them. It did make her pause, which was a feat unto itself, but that's all. Nothing could shut her up. She was also the kind of person that would complain she was being repressed when anyone at all had a disagreement about how something should be handled. Quite possibly the least pleasant person I've ever known. I worked with a climate scientist who could analyze climate data like nobody's business, but if you wanted him to do literally anything else, you had to hold his hand the entire time. Zero common sense, too. The senior staff at that office idolized him because of the PhD after his name, but one time he was in a car accident in a work vehicle, also his fault, and I asked for a copy of the police report for insurance purposes, and he said he didn't get one because, I thought you handled that. Why would I, who was not present at the time of the accident, have the police report that was written at the time of the accident? The other guy that you ran into has one. Not quite PhD. But I was at a party in the UK full of med students, and stereotypically everyone was off their face drunk. Well, some guy fell over and broke his collarbone and immediately got rushed by a dozen of them, all fussing and asking him the same questions over and going through the checklist. Half an hour later and he's still on the couch in pain, and I go in to ask if anybody knows why the ambulance is taking so long. Nobody had an answer because nobody had called one. A party full of medical students hadn't called an ambulance or made any transport arrangements for a guy in severe pain with a broken clavicle. Idiots. That's actually super common in emergencies when there's a group of any kind. One of the first things you learn in a lifeguard certification course is to identify a single person to instruct to call 911. Never just yell out, "Someone call 911," or assume that it's been done because everyone in the group is assuming someone else did it already. It's not necessarily that everyone forgot about it, just that everyone assumed it was the logical first step that someone else would have taken already. Singling somebody out tends to work because in an emergency there are 50 random people all wanting to do something to help, but none of them willing to take charge of the situation in fear of fucking it up. Single someone out and you will have taken charge for them and given them something to do that it's hard to be bad at. So they'll do it.